one of the producers grew up in State College, and he basically contacted me, and he was he throughout the entire process he pendulum back and forth between, like, I think right after everything happened, he wrote a letter of support to Joe Paterno, a personal letter of support, and then, you know, there were other times that he wanted to, like, just, you know, disown, run the Paternos out of town, and he cried every time he tried to talk about the story. So I thought there's something there, you know. The guy keeps flip-flopping about it. That's the story that I'm interested in.
And so what was it like getting access to the Paterno family?
Yeah, I mean, the access was obviously, so we started this, you know, the big week happened in November 2011, and we arrived in late February the next year, 2012. So, you know, people with cameras were not looked nicely upon by the time we got there. So access in general was very, very challenging. You know, we really had to be patient. It took a long time to get to Paterno's. And they have a kind of a fixer. I think he lives here in DC, actually. But yeah, and then, you know, we showed them the film right before it premiered at Sundance, and then we showed also, you know, Andy Shubin, the lawyer, and Matt Sandusky, the film the same day, and I was very pleased that, like, both sides, even though they don't agree with each other, felt that the film had been fair to them. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure the Paternos would have made a different film, you know, but they were pretty positive about the film. So.
I'm going to go ahead and start with this question here.
Hi, I'd just like to make a statement. I come from Central PA, and I have a degree from Penn State. I'm taught at Penn State. I did research at Penn State. And I don't think people who aren't from that area really realize how cult-like this whole thing is. I mean, it truly is like a cult religion. There's even something that people say about the sky being blue and the clouds silver because God loves Penn State. God made him that way. And after this happened, I'm not like a real football person. I lost lifelong friends for questioning the culpability of Joe Paterno. And even tonight, I told my son, I had like a 2.5-hour drive home, I told my son, I was seeing this film, and he said, oh boy. People are very upset about this still. And I think that people who love Joe Pa will love him forever. So.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a really fascinating story about identity, you know. And I hear what you're saying about Happy Valley itself. What I was trying to do, in part, was, you know, I'm interested in sort of like casting the widest circle of responsibility. And, you know, when we arrived, sort of like the 5 people who may have been involved in the conspiracy were all pointing the finger at Jerry Sandusky, saying, this is a story about one man. Like you hear Jay say at the beginning of the film, you know, why are you looking at us? You know, this one monster who we should run out of town. And then the rest of the town were like, look, whatever happened, it was probably just that one guy, or at the most, those 6 guys. And then the whole country was saying, like, there's something rotten in Happy Valley. You know, their love of football, they're crazy there. You know, and so it's just like this expiation that's happening at every, you know, kind of a tourniquet is being tied. Like, hey, that's not me, you know. And I was interested in, like, what part of this is all of us, you know, because. So that's why I didn't focus on Jerry Sandusky. And you could make, this is a big story, you could make another whole film about Jerry's crimes, you could make a film about college athleticism, you know, which obviously is a big topic right now. You could make a film about class issues. And you could make a film about the conspiracy, you know, whether or not there was a conspiracy, we don't quite know yet. The trial obviously hasn't even happened. I was interested in this story because I think Jerry's crimes are farther, as far away on the spectrum of human experience from most of us. You know, I mean, obviously people have contact with pedophilia it's not as uncommon as one would like to hope, but I think there's less lessons for most people in a guy who does these heinous crimes. And then even the conspiracy, like even if there was a conspiracy, and there very well may have been a conspiracy, that's a criminal thing that, you know, is easy for people to say, yeah, I would never do that, I would have gone straight to the cops. But that, you know, the stuff about distraction and spectacle and all those things are things that, you know, I myself am guilty of, you know, even though I'm not a sports fan. You know, and I think we're all kind of guilty of. So I'm interested in that kind of an inquiry. It just felt like I had the most to learn from it, you know, so yeah, so anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your, I mean, I think what you're saying about the cult of, you know, football and state college is true, but I'm sure it's also true in Alabama and other places, you know.
On the side.
Have students at Penn State and faculty seen this movie? And if they have, what's their reaction been?
I mean, it hasn't shown in state college yet, so there's always people who come. I mean, we've had a handful of, you know, it's on the festival circuit, and people, actually, at Sundance, one of the first questions of one of the very first screenings was from a guy named Lash, whose grandparents are the ones, I think, are the ones who, you know, built the Lash building where the showers were, where all this happened. So there are a lot of people from, you know, that are seeing the film as, you know, from the Penn State community. And I have to say, I'll just gripe, there's a lot more people talking about the film than have actually seen it. It's sort of crazy to me. Like there's, you know, there are some really crazy people, you know, that are trying to exculpate Jerry even, you know, and to say nothing of Joe. And they have a lot to say about the film, but I'm pretty sure very few of them have actually seen it, you know, so I don't know.
Yeah, first, I guess two questions. First of all, were there any interviews that you wanted to get that they didn't? The other question is, do you think that there was or will ever be any room for a middle ground? You know, on the one hand, the deification of Joe Paterno, and on the other hand, wiping out all the good he ever did in his whole life. Do you think there's ever going to be room for, okay, this is a man who was a great football coach who did many positive things and also made some very critical errors, and just kind of having a balanced picture?
Well, yeah, so your first question, the way I like to do these films is to cast a pretty wide net. So yeah, we did interview we interviewed 3 victims actually. We interviewed Graham Spanier and others who didn't, you know, make the film, not because they weren't great interviews or whatever, but just because you have to make choices about what story you're trying to tell. And of course, yeah, so I mean, I would have loved to have spoken with Jerry, Dottie, but I didn't try that hard with that for the reason I was mentioning before, because it just felt like that's just becomes a 600-pound gorilla, and you know, it would have totally become a very different film if you had Jerry in it. So I kind of tried half-heartedly, and then your other question. I mean, well, that's why I think this is an interesting story. I think everybody's going to have a different take on the question that you raise, whether or not his crimes or his failing. Joe's, you know, there are some people who think that Joe didn't fail at all, and there are other people who think Joe failed so bad that he should be, you know, wiped off the map, wiped out of memory. And I think there are people who have any number of, you know, middle ground perspectives on that. And I can tell you, you know, I cruised from Brooklyn, and we had this 4-hour drive back and forth from Happy Valley for, you know, 2 years, and we would debate these questions and change our minds about them constantly. And, you know, I mean, that's another reason. So, you know, the question of the conspiracy will be hopefully settled in this trial, possibly settled in this trial. That hasn't yet happened. But I felt like, you know, speculating on whether Joe, like what actually Joe meant in those emails, would not be, I didn't think the film actually needed to do that, because if you just stick with something you don't have to speculate about, Joe, in his own words, said it was a matter of a section. It's like he came to me and said it was a sexual nature. And then he went and told the guy above him. We know that. That's it. Irrefutable. So I think that's interesting enough. That there's enough to kind of ask the question that you're asking. Just on that, is that enough? People have different opinions.
Well, the film professor said that, people tend to avoid taking a deep look at things that are troubling.
Yeah.
So it's, a lot of people just don't want to look and,
I think, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's fascinating. And if I had a hunch, I would say that that was very much at play, that people just have an amazing capacity to not see what, will shatter their image of themselves. And, so a lot of people think, they had to protect the brand and, there was a conspiracy. And really, I want to say, it's very possible that that's true too. But I don't think there is yet concrete evidence of that. Yet there were clearly some blinders and some incuriosity and a failure to ask follow-up questions.
on this side.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that you didn't try and make a very clear answer and take a very clear position was what made it a terrific film, because it did take a deeper look. My niece was at Penn State during this, and when she graduated, every employment interview that she had contained a question about what she felt about this. And it was just insane that everything, focused on this when she was just a student at Penn State. The question that I had, and sorry for so long, is there a question in there?
That's all right.
Did you interview the graduate student who had initially reported it to Paterno?
No,
and
yeah.
also, did you interview any of the players?
That actually is the interview that I really wish I had gotten, with Mike McQuarrie. And his story, it's pretty interesting, and also I think has to do with that sort of seeing and not seeing. There's some interesting stuff that's maybe part of a different, it is part of a different film, but that somebody could make. That guy Jim Clementi, who the Paterno's commissioned to do their report. He has some, there's some pretty compelling ideas that he has that, he points to. And maybe there are ideas that have an agenda or whatever, but I have to say I find them kind of interesting about Mike McQuarrie, where he says, look at the language Mike McQuarrie used to describe what happened. He says, the quotes, I'll paraphrase them, basically I slammed the locker 3 times so they would know I was there. Clementi says, you don't say that about a rape. If you think you're seeing a rape, you don't say hey, I'm here, I can hear this. You say that about what you perceive as a consensual act, right? Now, obviously, you can't give consent if you're a kid. But, and again, this is all speculative. I probably shouldn't be doing it. But Mike McQuarrie, perhaps conflated what he was seeing with homosexuality. In a way, which happens. I think people, in the last film that I saw, they mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm way out on a tangent, but, Jeffrey Dahmer, it's really terrible to talk about, but Jeffrey Dahmer, his last victim escaped and ran naked and bleeding and half dead through the streets and got to a police car. And Dahmer was able to convince the cops to give him back because it was a gay thing, and the cops were like, yeah, okay, just keep it inside, and I think there's something in this story that is connected to that. Again, this is just wild speculation, but I think there are people who, if they think about it hard enough, they know there's a difference between homosexuality and pedophilia, but if they don't think about it, and then they may have homophobia of some kind, they conflate the two things, and that may have been at work here. But I have to be very careful how I talk about these things.
And so McQuarrie wouldn't be interviewed?
No, he would not be interviewed. Yeah.
Let's go to this question here.
Thank you. I too am former faculty member at Penn State. I retired a few years ago, so I am from State College. I thought it might be helpful to say a little bit more about what has happened on a positive note in Center County, in Happy Valley, that's not related to football. I mean, I understand that, you know, the focus of this film, but of the millions of dollars that the university has been fined on a yearly basis, starting within months of the horrible tragedy that we experienced. Several things happen simultaneously. One is a domestic violence organization partnered with Penn State and the community and started a massive training of community members, citizens. I went through it, thousands of us, with a goal of training thousands of people to change their sense of duty and awareness. And there have also been yearly conferences for professionals, for victims. Very famous people who have been victimized have been brought to those conferences. That will go on for the duration. One final highlight for what has happened in the area is the creation of what the judicial system thinks can be a model a center for children who have been abused to be able to, you've seen this around the country and other places, but Penn State and the community have spent a huge amount of, and the medical community, for a child victim to be able to go to one site and be interviewed, and there are ways in which police, victims advocates, and so forth can hear that interview to avoid further traumatization on the part of the victim for not having to report to people over and over.
Thank you. Do you have a question? Or?
Well, I just wanted to make that comment
thanks.
because there's been so much emphasis, and I can't say it's unfair about the cult of football in Center County, but there is the other side.
Yeah.
Just two comments. I'm fairly certain, unless there's another film, it was shown at the State Theater in State College, unless
there is another film, yeah.
There is
You're
another
talking
film.
about, yeah.
It could have been that one. And I think the verdict came on June 22nd. I think you have June 2nd on your, but I think it's June 22nd.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, thanks.
So publicly, no. I'll let you know. Yeah. No, I already have to change the titles because I said, the trial's going to happen in 2014, and I don't think that's going to happen, so.
What surprised you most during this whole process with, people you met and the Paterno family? What was the thing that you found most interesting?
I'll tell you that statue scene was pretty, when they're fighting at the statue and it's a problem. It looks like we staged it, but we really didn't. It was just, a documentary godsend kind of moment. We saw, when you see that guy with the, when you see him walk up, that's like the frame in which he walked into our scene. I have a great crew, and one of the fun things about documentary filmmaking is the intuitive kind of improvisational group dynamics. It's like playing in a rock band or something. Anyway, whatever. But the point is, we were trying to figure out what to do, and we were like, well, let's just go back to the statue. We'll shoot something there. That seems like an interesting place to be right now, because people were going to kind of say goodbye to the statue, and we had already been up there, but we just had a lull, and we were waiting for somebody. I don't remember what, but we decided, I think things will happen at the statue. And my cameraman set up that shot, and that guy walked into it, and it was just, I've tried to cut it in such a way that it doesn't look like we totally staged it, because we had the tripod and the boom, and people were just ignoring, more or less
They seemed
ignoring
completely unaware.
Yeah, and so it was like filming with almost too good coverage, because we were booming the argument, I tried to rough it up as much as I could in the edit, but people keep thinking that it's staged, or that we ushered the guy in to get a good scene out of it. I don't know, yeah.
All right, we have time for one last question, a quick question here.
Comments.
Well,
Another alumni. I was wondering how many alumni were here.
There's a lot, yeah.
Wow. I so appreciate you're doing this, and to me, this series of incidents has changed the name Penn State forever, like the word Columbine or how they say Boston or everything else. And this came, for me, it was wrenching here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And it came on the heels of a murder case in which two managers at a iPhone store listened to 300 blows after hours, 300 different injuries, where they heard the woman go, "Can't we just talk about this?" to, "Oh God, someone help me." 300 different strikes to kill this woman. And when this was going on, I just honestly felt like no one steps up morally. So the biggest and most important theme to me is moral culpability and inaction on people. And I have been, since these two things, urging people to step up. And one of the, I'll stop, but, but the hero to me is, the biggest hero is Matt Sandusky, because he came from such a mess and stood up to it and lost everything a second time. And it should be mentioned, one of the things that shocks me the most is that Graham Spanier, the president of Penn State, his background was psychology and family therapy, and he knew about this, obviously, for at least 10 years.
I want to mention that the woman here was talking about changes in town. Also, Matt Sandusky has set up his own foundation recently, like in the last month, and he's going to become an advocate. So I agree he's the hero. And I mean, I have to say that I think there's a lot of failing in the film, but if he's the hero, then the villain is the mob. To me, that's what is another thing that it's about mob mentality, and it's about groupthink, I think, in some ways, and I think the reason I love Tyler as a character is because I don't agree with everything he says, but in fact I don't agree with a lot of what he says. The kid thinks the kid, but I mean the way he talks about the
cross.
Yeah, no, well, that's great too, but just the phoniness, the phoniness of the kind of the genuflecting, I mean, the same people who riot and then like candlelight vigil the very next day, and then my great crew, like my cameraman caught the Nittany Lion kind of hanging his head and sighing during the moment of silence. Like that stuff is just. I mean, it's priceless, and I don't think it's indicative only to football. It's sort of the way we are as human beings, So, anyway.
We do actually have to wrap it up here.
We can talk
There's another
after.
film, but
Yeah.
Amir, I believe, will be in the lobby, and I'm
Thanks
sure
a lot.
he'll want to talk to you, and we really appreciate you for being here. What's next for the film, if you could say?
Oh, it's going to show in Brooklyn on Tuesday, and then we should have a theatrical release in the fall.
Great.
So, thanks.
Well, thanks again.